601 here in Cape Town, so let's go for it. So this is our final session, and today you can see I've already got up on my screen. Keep drawing, keep moving, keep using your character, and then expect that all characters will change. And so what we're going to do today is really probably the most practical of our sessions, and we're going to go back to the characters or the figures that we've drawn in the past few days and just practice moving them around, not necessarily with clothes on them. But what I find that people struggle the most with, especially initially, is that really getting comfortable with moving. So let's pop in here. I'm just going to quickly switch off the color background here and go back to white, because that's going to be more practical. And so what I wanted to put in here for you to look at is this idea of your sticky being almost like a puppet on a string. So I don't know if you've ever watched a Punch and Judy show. I know maybe that's just a very particularly English thing that I always think of. But those funny little puppets in a stage where someone's hiding behind and they can move the hands and the strings and everything, all the joints are kind of attached to a string and you can move them around. And I find this quite a useful way to think about our stick figures, because if we bring up, where is my stick? This one. If you imagine us, particularly a string attached to each elbow and each knee, each ankle and each wrist, you can imagine your little person moving around quite a lot. And it's a good idea to just move each joint, see what you can do with it, because there's such an endless number of possibilities. And sure, you will run into times when you try to make your stick figure do something which it just can't do, or which a human body can't do. But it's worth the trial and error and feeling like you broke its legs or arms to actually get the practice in. So I'm going to pull up a color and let us just start to move our sticks. If we put in a head and our shoulders like this, imagine this shoulder, if we put this shoulder up and another shoulder down, and then take our arm out and the wrist up, hand could be loose, this arm could be down. So I'm literally going to just play today, and you can follow along if you want to. I'm not doing specific poses. I just want to go through a very organic process with you of getting your little people to move and getting a sense that if you move them in a way that a human body can't move, it's actually not really a problem, because your mind and your eye is quite geared to what is possible. And so at first you might think, but how will I know if I got it wrong? You will get better and better at recognizing something's not right here. And if it's not right, if you get that sense this isn't right, don't necessarily spend a lot of time trying to correct it at that point. It's better to just put a cross through what you were doing and start again with something else, because the harder you think, the less instinctive your drawing process becomes. So if we just draw ourselves along like this, we can end up with our little people lurching around. And I would recommend that you do a bit of this every day, just 2 or 3 figures in different positions, doing different things, preferably as moving as possible, because they are much more interesting the more they move around. Oopsie, I'll put those all on one layer. One moment. Okay, let's go and find our moving torso. So this particular one has already got a little bit of a bend and a curve to it. You can see that I left out the elbow joints on this particular side. So if we wanted to go and move like this, we could end up with our character moving a little bit differently. My eraser is the right size. So you can see just by changing things around, you can end up with a very different and much more active looking stick. The other thing is, once you've moved the limbs like this, you can also start to move the head angles. So if I just erase a little bit within this very messy head that I did back in the day. In the original, the nose was pointing this way, but if we were to point the nose this way, we end up with a whole lot more going on. And then as you start to move the head, you'll also end up with, we have lost our screen share. Interesting how that happens. One moment. Sorry about this, won't be a moment. Okay, it says it's sharing. What is it up to? When your tech fights. We're back. Okay, so where was I? Oh, as you start to move the head, you'll notice that you have to adjust what's happening with the neck and the spine, because as the head goes back, you'll end up with a curve to the spine. Everything has to move around with it. So as you go through, just work more and more with getting those very organic changes to happen. And you'll find that you start to have more of a sense of exactly what it is that your character or your little stick figure can do. And when you draw a stick figure, you can start, obviously you will probably start with or have a sense of what your character's proportions are. But what you will find, and everyone does, is if you use any sort of a reference, and I would recommend that you do, you will tend to use the proportions of whatever it is you're using as a reference. So if you find something online, say if you want to draw someone running and you find a pose, someone running, you will end up trying to use the same proportions as whatever it is you're copying. And that's actually not a bad thing. It just means you've got a fairly accurate eye. So be prepared always to start readjusting your proportions back towards what you want them to be, even if you initially copy them as something which isn't quite what you wanted. So yeah, pretty much all these joints can move separately. There are also feet are very mobile. So you'll find that feet will end up on the ground with a bit of a bend in them like this. And that's also something that you'll get used to and start playing around with as you go a little bit further. But I wouldn't worry about it too much at this stage, because it can bog you down quite a lot if you worry about that too soon. Okay, so this one, interesting. Let's try something where we deliberately go wrong. So this is what I see people do sometimes, is they end up bending the knees in a direction that knees can't physically bend as a human. So something to remember is that noses and toes, so noses and toes and knees all tend to go in the same direction. So if your nose is pointing forwards and your toes are pointing forwards, the knee's going to have to go in that direction too. If it goes in the opposite direction, like this one that I've just drawn here, either you are looking at it from an interesting angle, or your person's got a dislocated knee somehow. Okay, so the foot might get a different angle. This might be where she's got kind of pigeon toes. So you could end up like this, where the toes are pointing towards each other, like this. It's still a pretty odd looking pose, but that's more possible. But if her toe was pointing in this direction, then this knee definitely can't work. And similarly to that, your elbows. So an elbow can't bend forward like that. You can hold your arm out and then twist it, but if an elbow ends up bending forward, generally it's a little dislocated as well. So those are just a couple of things to bear in mind. But definitely noses and toes is something that I am always saying to people. Keep your noses going in the same direction as the toes are pointing. Okay, we can move this arm out, make this one a little bit like a scarecrow person. And her arm like that. What shall we do with this one? Okay, let's just lift this leg. Imagine there's a little string attached to there. There, you can have the toes pointing down. And remember also when you go in and fill back in your bodies, you're going to end up with trousers kind of coming like this. So when you fill in the legs and so on, you're still going to end up having to adjust probably the position of the feet and quite exactly how your person's body fits in here, because this bone is going to be the top half of the leg as opposed to the middle of it. Okay, moving on to, we are getting back to our Superman position. What should he do? Well, I mean, I suppose he could be flying. Put my layer up right. Okay, so making him fly is going to be quite tricky. I haven't left myself a whole lot of room. But if he was to fly towards us, let's, you know what, I'm not going to confuse you with that. That is going to be way out of our comfort zone here. Let's just keep moving stick figure things around. Okay, so let's make Mr. Stick. We can adjust his triangle and kind of put it a little bit off like that. And hips like this. He looks a little off balance now. What could he be doing? Fighting, perhaps? I'm not much of a superhero person myself. Another really fun thing to do as you practice getting your sticks moving is to find pictures on the internet of people dancing. Specifically, ballroom dancing is a lot of fun. And if you're looking for a challenge, partners who are actually dancing, you know, the classic ballroom. So things like waltzes can be so much fun to decode a little bit and make into sticks. And it's amazing the sense of movement and kind of rhythm almost that comes right off your page as you get into it. It takes a bit of practice, and you'll definitely make some really bizarre mistakes, but it's a lot of fun to get those bodies moving together. So I would recommend that as you go further. Okay, Mr. Soft Knees, hang on one sec. So one of the things that people also find quite tricky is something like kicking a football. So if you have a leg, let's have the hips like that. If you have a leg straight out, so we're going to have a fairly bent leg to give you a bit of balance. And then this leg, you need to find a position. So for things, sporting type positions like that, I would recommend that you go onto Google and find yourself a reference. But when you look for the reference, look for one which has a sense of tension in it, because you need to get that sense that the person is either their leg is kind of in motion, so you've got it's on the move, or else at the extremes of what's happening with the pose. So it might be kicking way out in front, or the leg drawn all the way back to give a massive kick, something like that, because otherwise you lose that sense of the excitement that you might get, or the, what is it? It literally is the kind of tension in the muscles as they stretch to their maximum potential. And then also the like leaning right forward. You can see I'm not a footballer. What am I even doing here? If he were to kick wildly for goal, say, he might end up off balance like this. And then with his foot out in front, you end up really tricky with your knees, because the knees, you want to make them pretty straight, but that's not necessarily what's happened. So this is why I say to you with specifically with sport, because action in sport is so fast, you really need that kind of split-second photograph to give you a sense of what's actually going on. And there's so many different possibilities of what the different poses could be. This is our almost final running pose. Where is he? There we go. Okay, so this guy was running pretty leisurely. I don't think he was running to catch a bus. He was just taking a little toddle after his dog or something. If you want to get him moving much more, you can stretch his limbs out a whole lot. Let's try that quickly. So if we bend him forward and have this leg out much more and this leg out the back, his arms are going to be like this around his body. You're going to get much more of a sense of action from him. Keep moving my eraser around and not quite getting the right width of it. Okay, so we need some shoulders, we need some arms, arm on this side. It's all looking a bit messy, not to worry. So the main thing would be to get the curve of his body here, because he's running pretty fast. And good. No, it's going in the right direction. Okay, with running poses like that, you need a really pretty solid silhouette. So you want to be able to see probably the closest arm drawn right back like this, and the far arm on the other side of the body, so that you can see both the elbows nice and clear. Because without being able to see the elbows nice and clear, you can't really get a sense that he's at a full stretch of his run. Okay, so these little ones were the ones that we did on, I think it was day 2, looking at very odd proportions, or just fiddling around with small, medium, and large. And again, I left out some of the joints when I was quickly doing them at the end of that session. So if you go in and just put in the joints again, it gives you a sense of where you can move them. I always end up with that sense of working against gravity because of the little strings. So this one. I think this guy, I'm going to bend at his elbows. Put them up like this. I'll finally then. What should we do with him? Oh, I know. Actually, this is something that I thought of earlier. Let's try this quickly. So one of the things that people struggle with is getting their character to sit down. So because when you sit down, especially if someone's looking straight at you, let's imagine this person sitting in an armchair. So we've got our person's head, shoulders, hips, knees, ankles, feet. And I'm not going to worry about arms for right now. So if this person were to sit down, effectively what would happen is if we were sitting or standing kind of in front of them almost eye to eye when they're sitting on an armchair, we would end up losing their thighs because the thighs would be sticking straight towards us. And in fancy terms, that would be called foreshortening. But when something's sticking straight towards you, you don't really see it. So imagine this person would be sitting down Let's imagine armchairs on each side like this. Hands might be on the sides of the armchair. And now suddenly there they are sitting, and we can put a bit of chair in behind them. So effectively we lost the height of their thighs, and there they are now sitting in the chair. So it's a good idea to think about those sort of things as you try to get your person to sit, because it's much more interesting to have someone sitting like this, obviously, than to have them side on like that. So if you've got them in perfect profile and sitting sort of like this, you can see better what's going on, kind of, but it's also pretty uninteresting. Whereas this one is a little bit more lifelike. You can imagine someone sitting there looking at you, and you can turn them into a person more easily like this. And then they've got their chair underneath. So those are the sort of things that you're going to end up having to think about as you start to put your person into more realistic kind of positions, or give them things to do as they interact with objects. Okay, this is true. Hands. A similar thing to what happened with the thighs has also happened with the forearms in that particular case, because the person's sitting with their elbows on the arms of the chair and their hands kind of over the front of those, or on the inside of the chair arms. So we lose a bit of the length of the arm in here. Length of the forearm just ends up much shorter than it would be in general. So here we could see it, because you'd see the hands like that from the shoulder, but yeah, we don't see so much of that length of that arm. Okay, that pretty much brings us to the end of what I was planning to cover with you. And it's kind of the beginning of the journey of any cartoon characters. Once you get the absolute basics down there, it's a matter of using it a little bit, as writers say, that their characters take on a life of their own and kind of start to dictate to them. And I've really have noticed that a lot with people who work with me, that their characters suddenly, the more they draw, the more ideas they have. So you'll never run out of ideas. And if you do, you can always just nip onto your computer and find a few references. And as you start drawing, ideas start to come. So I always say to people that if you haven't got any ideas, just start moving your pencil. Whatever you're moving, whatever surface you're moving it across, the marks will start to make all sorts of suggestions to your imagination. And before you know it, you'll be drawing something, and it'll probably turn into something fun. So that's about it.